Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest, Hersch Wilson. And he's here today to share with us his new book, Firefighter Zen, a field guide to thriving in tough times. Now, do firefighters and Zen practices have anything in common? As in Zen practice, firefighters are fully trained to be in the moment and present to each heartbeat, each life at hand. Today, Hersch will share with us some of the Zen-like techniques that allow people like him to stay grounded while navigating danger, comforting others, and coping with their personal responses to each crisis. So Hersch Wilson is a 30-year veteran volunteer firefighter EMT with the Hondu Fire Department in Santa Fe County, New Mexico. He also writes a column on dogs for the Santa Fe New Mexican. So let's welcome to the show, Hersch Wilson.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
You know, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. I got to tell you, once I picked it up, I couldn't put it down. When you first start off your book, I mean, you almost want to cry when you talk about that little girl.
Oh, yeah. That was, that call stuck with me. And what it was a car accident and no one was badly hurt, but we didn't know that going in. And my chief assigned me to go down to the car. He said there was a young girl in the car. So I walked down to the car and my pulse rate was going up because you never know. It's with kids. I walked down to the car. It was winter. And I opened the door to the car and I said, "Hey, my name's Hersch Wilson. I'm with the fire department." And this young girl, she must have been 6, just leapt into my arms, jumped into my arms and just clung to me. And I took her and I walked her up to the ambulance so she could be checked out. But it was just one of those calls that reminds you why you want to be in service to others, why you want to be a first responder.
Well, thank you for all the work that you're doing. And my goodness, you're doing this as a veteran volunteer firefighter. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I've been a volunteer firefighter with Santa Fe County Fire Department for 33 years.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you. And I love the story of how your wife was really the instigator for all of this, you know?
Absolutely.
Why don't you share that with our listeners? I'm sure they would love to hear that.
Sure. So my wife, Lori, and I moved to New Mexico in 1984. And in 1985, she got a job at a conference center just outside of Santa Fe. And one day, a guest fell and broke her ankle. Well, being rural New Mexico, there was not any medical support. No one there had any first aid training. So they did what they could to call an ambulance. That took an hour and get her in the ambulance, get her in the hospital. Well, Lori swore she was never going to let that happen again. So she decided to take an emergency medical technician class, which is about a 6-month class, so that she could provide medical support at the conference center. What happened then was at the end of the class, her instructor said, "Lori, if you want to keep your skills sharp, why don't you join a fire department?" And she thought that was a great idea. And she came home and told me, "We're joining a fire department." And I, of course, had no interest at that time. And I could not imagine myself with an axe breaking down a door. I had a thing about blood and gore. So I wasn't really enthusiastic. But she dragged me to a meeting. And in our first meeting, they're passing around a picture. And you have to imagine this is a meeting in a fire department garage, and there are all kinds of different people there. But they're all kind of brought together by this one mission to be firefighters. And they're passing around this picture of a fatality they had the last week. And the picture came around, and Lori just thought it was really interesting. I looked at it, almost passed out. Kept me interested, and after about 2 months of going to trainings, I really fell in love with it and kind of knew that this is the thing that was missing from my life in terms of being in service to others. So that's how it all began.
So, at what point did you see that there is a correlation between Zen and firefighting? Because I think for a lot of people, that might be something that they have a hard time bringing together.
Oh, of course. And it took me a while to understand, but I think of it this way. I think of Zen and being a firefighter as different roads to the same conclusion and same consequences. Um, Firefighting very quickly teaches you the fragility of life. It teaches you that death is at the end for all of us. It teaches you that stuff happens. And I think right now with the pandemic is a great example of that. We act often under the illusion that we're safe, that life just goes on, that there are no tragedies. We're taught by our culture that life is about youth and about plans and about getting things done, when in reality, life is full of tragedy. We're just experiencing it now on a global level, but on an individual level, the kind of heartbeat of the universe is that life is hard, life is difficult. And I think it takes you to the same point that Zen takes you. And Buddha said life is suffering. And I think you learn that as a firefighter. And then you learn, so once you strip away all those illusions of life is supposed to be comfortable, life is supposed to be this, life is supposed to be that, and you realize that life is about suffering, and life, secondly, is about service. That where we find true joy, not happiness. I mean, happiness is like getting a new car, right? But and that happiness lasts for a couple of weeks, and then you have French fries in the back of your car. And in our case, we'd have French fries and soccer socks in the back of our car. But you realize that true joy comes from serving others, from taking care of others, being in service to the world. And I think that's where Zen and firefighting meet.
With incorporating Zen, and so our listeners can kind of understand as well, I'm sure it's a very just tough and grueling job being a firefighter, coming across some of the things that you come across. How do you leave that at home, and how does that work with the Zen practice?
I think being a firefighter fundamentally transforms your view of the world. And the example I use is after a bad call in the middle of the night. What I would do is come home and sneak into my daughter's bedroom and just sit down and listen to her breathe and be so grateful for that moment in time. And you realize that that's all we really have is that moment. All you and I have right now is this moment. We're not promised anything else, right? So it's really understanding that we need to take these moments that come at us every day and really enjoy them and understand that this is what life is. There's no promises of the future. Worrying about the past is pointless, but just living in this moment. And I think being a firefighter just really reinforces that kind of Zen principle.
Well, definitely the motto of the firefighters, I think, brings people to that place where you're in the present moment. And I'd love for you to share that with us.
Yeah, I think when you go to a fire or a car accident or a medical call, you walk into that, and that's all there is that moment, right? Everything else is gone, and you're just extremely focused, usually on helping somebody else who's in pain, who's suffering, or is watching their house burn down. And it's just an interesting feeling because most of us during our daily life, we have this kind of narrative going inside of our heads of things from the past, things from the future. It's like we all have a little bit of attention deficit syndrome. But when you're a firefighter, you get extremely focused in the moment. And then that's such an addictive feeling to really understand the moment and be in the moment that you take that back and say, right, this is what I want in my life. How do you do that? I mean, I think of bringing that practice into my daily life every morning, just in a kind of a mindful walk with my dogs, where I can just be in that moment. And my dogs, just kind of a sidebar, but my dogs have taught me mindfulness. I mean, because they're so focused in the moment, they're so focused in every smell, every movement, every blade of grass, and it has always taught me to be that way, and to use mornings to really kind of remind myself of that mindful approach.
Yeah, dogs will definitely keep a person mindful, you know,
Definitely, yeah.
throughout that journey. In your book, you talk about the firefighter universe. What is that?
Sure. The firefighter universe, we think of it as a couple things. I mean, there are a couple things. It's first of all, that we understand in the firefighter universe that life is short, our time here is temporary, and that's all there is, right? If you lay in bed at night and you think of the infinity of time prior to your birth and the infinity of time that will exist after you die, right? We are here for just a second. Second principle is that stuff happens. You know, we are masters of the fact as firefighters that stuff happens. You can have a plan for the day, you can have your calendar organized, but at any point in the day, stuff can happen. You clutch your chest and fall down in a Starbucks with a heart attack. You have a car accident. All those things are constantly happening in our universe, reminding us that it is temporary and fragile. So those are the two big principles of the firefighter universe: is that life is short and stuff happens. And I think the truth, of course, is that that's the same universe we all live in. Firefighters are just more acutely aware of it, but that's the same universe we live in. And I think what we're going through now is people understanding that their lives have been disrupted out of the blue. And we would say that, yes, this is not just about a pandemic, but this is how life is. We might not do it at a worldwide global level, but individually, this is how life works. It's short, stuff happens, and at any moment, our lives turn on that dime.
Well, I know in your book you talk about hula hoops and firefighters, and most people would not even think that has a correlation. And I'd love for you to expand on that.
Sure. So what we're taught in incident command school, when you're in an emergency, often the kind of natural reaction is to run to the loudest person, the one who's screaming the most, or the biggest fire. What we're taught is to pretend you have a hula hoop. And what you want to do is put the hula hoop on the ground and stand in the middle of that hula hoop, right? No matter who's screaming, no matter who's yelling at you, no matter what's going on, stand and see what's actually going on, right? Someone's got to think about and see the big picture. And the way that works in our lives is when stuff happens, we sometimes panic, we get excited, we don't know what we're doing, and we don't take that moment to kind of stand inside the mental hula hoop and ask ourselves the question, what's really happening? In the fire service, we're taught after we do that to do what we call a 360, which means walking around. If a building's on fire, to walk around the entire building, see the entire scene, understand what's going on before we take action. And that way we don't make all kinds of mistakes later on. So it's taking that time in the middle of an emergency, in the middle of a crisis, to really stop, pause, think, see what's going on. And I think about that. A common example is you get a cancer diagnosis, right? And your immediate reaction often is to panic. And the hard thing to do is just step back, think, listen to the doctor, get the big picture, and not just immediately emotionally react, but to think through what it really means.
Is using that perspective, the firefighter perspective, a way that would really benefit people that are going through difficult times and just maybe unforeseen circumstances like you're talking about, like cancer?
I think so. And the way we think about it and the way we're trained to think about it is if you look at things that happen to you on a daily basis, the negative things that happen to you. And the way our brain works is that often we'll take something that's relatively minor and we'll blow it up into a tragedy. And the example I use is like being stuck in traffic. So you're going to a meeting, you're stuck in traffic, and the way our brain works is, I'm going to be late. If I'm late, my boss is going to be mad. If my boss is mad, he's going to give me a negative report. He'll probably fire me. I'm going to end up, I'm going to go home. My husband or wife is going to divorce me. I'm going to end up on the street homeless, right? And our brain does that in like 5 or 6 seconds if we don't intervene. So what we're taught on the fire service, and I think the key point is 95% of the 911 calls we go on are not true emergencies. They're not emergencies. But sometimes our brains will hijack our thinking and call it an emergency. So someone falls down the stairs, it's a sick call. If it's not an immediate life threat or a house burning down, firefighters don't consider that an emergency. So we had to build another language. How do we describe those calls? And I use the word, and it's my mantra, and the mantra is inconvenience. So when I start getting ramped up, a 911 page goes off, and you can hear sirens ramping up in the distance. You say, is this call a true emergency or is it an inconvenience? And we find out that most of the calls we respond to are not emergencies, they're inconveniences. Now you take that to our lives, and it's the same approach. 95% of the negative stuff that we encounter every day is not a true emergency. It's not a life threat. Your house is not burning down. It's merely an inconvenience. And if we can say to ourselves, this is just an inconvenience, then we don't get ramped up, we don't get adrenalized, we don't panic, and then we're better able to solve the problem, whatever that problem might be. So I think the ability to discipline our thinking and always ask the question, if you're stuck in traffic, you're stuck in an elevator, right? The copy machine doesn't work, your kid comes home with a bad report card, and ask yourself, is this a tragedy or is this merely an inconvenience? And I think you do that, you'll find out that most of the stuff that we come across in life are inconveniences rather than tragedies.
You know, how true is that? I mean, because it seems like most of us have one bucket for all this is like emergency tragedies, when it's really, it could be inconveniences. It could be, well, things didn't really go my way, or this isn't what I planned for, but those are challenges definitely I can get around.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it starts with really discipline your thinking and not letting your thinking, when something happens, not let your thinking run away with you. It's really taking the time, like, again, in that hula hoop, asking yourself, is this an emergency? Do I need to do something right away, or is this simply an inconvenience?
Okay, I'm going to put you on the hot seat a little bit here, because I know you suggest that we should invite in more difficulties into our lives. So right. Why in the world would we do that?
I think it's a fun topic for me. So first of all, we take as a premise that no matter who you are, no matter how comfortable your life is, tragedy will come into your life. There is no escaping that. That's the one promise the universe makes, is that we all experience tragedy. Now, given that as a premise, our culture teaches us that what's important is comfort, what's important is ease, what's important is money, yada, 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 right? So sometimes we kind of drift away from kind of the fundamental truths of life. And then when something bad happens, we're not prepared. And I think about my grandparents here, and I think a lot of people have done this in the pandemic. Both my grandmother and my grandfather were born in the beginning of in 1900. So they went through the First World War. They went through the flu epidemic of 1918 and 19. They went through the Great Depression. They went through the Second World War. They went through the Vietnam War, and so on and so on and so on. And you see that their life was hard, right? And they were very resilient people. So, but what happens when you live in comfort, like a lot of us in the kind of the first world, the white world, we live pretty comfortable lives, and we lose that resilience to understand how tough we are. So to counter that, what I teach and talk about a lot is that we need to invite toughness in our lives. We need to do things that are hard. We need to do things that are hard, whether they're physically hard or whether they're mentally hard and challenging, to give ourselves the confidence and to understand that we're highly resilient people. One of the things that always kind of irritated me was, they spoke of the greatest generation, the World War II generation, and I believe, they were amazing. What they went through and what they did were amazing. But that's inside all of us. That ability to be the greatest generation is inside all of us. But we're not called out to do it. But we need to work on that muscle. We need to build that muscle to understand that we are tough, we're resilient, we have a lot of grit. But if we just kind of go on our normal lives and are addicted to the idea of comfort, we'll never learn that.
Isn't that the truth? I think a lot of people really haven't had the opportunity to kind of test the mettle of who they are,
Exactly.
because we've been so comfortable. And, maybe it's time to kind of reassess things and look at things differently.
Right. And I think the two things are, because we're human beings, and if you look at kind of our long history, we're highly resilient, we're extremely tough, but we sometimes as individuals we lose that, and I think it's time to relearn that, especially now. Especially trying to get. We will get through this. We're going to get through the pandemic. We're going to get through the recession, but it's going to take us to be tough. It's going to take us to be tough. And I think saying things like it's all right, everything's going to be fine, is a false message. I think the true message is it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, but we are tough enough to get through this.
Well, what is your advice for people that are going through like extreme grief right now?
Oh, yeah. So I have a whole section in the book called The Grief Road. And I think firefighters, of course, we see a lot of tragedy. We see a lot of death. And a lot of that, I think there's this myth that we walk away from these calls and are not affected. And I think of the same thing of the first responders and the medical staff that are dealing with COVID deaths now. It affects us. So we are very familiar with grief. And I think that I would say two things. I would say there is no one way. There's no one way to grieve, that everybody has their own path. And I think sometimes we think that there's the Kubler-Ross, the 5 steps or the 6 steps of grief. And I've learned that just is not true, that everybody has their own path in grieving. So that's the first thing. So you shouldn't feel guilty about how you feel, right? You're going to feel the way you feel. You just need to accept that. I think the second thing that's important that I've learned over and over and over again, my example is once after a really bad call, we had a fire department meeting the next morning to talk about the call. And this one firefighter stood up and said, the next few months are going to suck. And there's such wisdom there because he was acknowledging the fact that we are all in pain. And what grief really is pain. And we were going through pain. And we knew that there would be nights of no sleep, there'd be nightmares, there'd be that kind of detached feeling from life where you're kind of walking in a fog. But the other important part of his message was it was just going to be a few months, that we'd get through this. And the key thing is that we're not going to go back to the way it was. We're not going to recover in the sense of being the way we were. We'll be changed. We'll be different, but we will get through this and we will be whole again. We will incorporate what happened into ourselves, but we will be whole. And I think that's what I've learned about grief.
Through all of your time as a firefighter, what do you think are some of the most important lessons that have really stood out for you?
I think a couple. I think when you start as a firefighter, you're kind of addicted to the adrenaline, the excitement, the lights and sirens, and all that attendant stuff. I think after a while that fades, and after a while, and you learn that what motivates good first responders is their desire to help people, their desire to be in service. And if you look at all the great religious traditions, being in service to others is kind of embedded in every of the major religions. And I think as a firefighter, you learn that's a very powerful feeling, and it's very addictive to be in service to others. I think the other thing that you learn is that you're strong enough and tough enough to endure lots of things that if you're not a firefighter, you think, I could never do that. But you learn you can. So you learn you're tough. You learn that in service to others, you can get through a lot, and you can be incredibly helpful. So those are the two kind of major themes: being in service to others and learning that we are tough enough to get through really hard things.
Well, you talk about toughness in your book. Why is that so important?
Well, it's like I said, I think especially in the last 50 years, right? Most of us have been told that life is about comfort and life is about ease. And clearly life is not. Clearly life is hard. And in order to be fulfilled, in order to find joy, we need to be tough, right? We cannot get knocked down by every single little thing that happens to us. And from a firefighter point of view, if you really think about today, everybody in my family is alive. Today, it is a beautiful day. I'm going to enjoy it, and hold on to that thought, and to realize that getting that all the bad things that can happen to us are not that sometimes that significant in the sense of like I'm still alive, my family's alive. I might get fired. I might get a divorce. I might get sick, but I'm tough enough to get through all that kind of stuff. If we just focus on the fact that we're alive and well, and we can get through everything, but it needs us to step up to the plate about being tough.
You also talk, and I think I have time for one more question here. You also talk in your book about kindness.
Yeah.
And how is that interwoven in your story?
I think Robin Williams, before he died, said it best. He said that everybody has a story, be kind. And boy, as a firefighter, you'll learn that. You learn that every time you turn a corner, every time you go to a call, there's somebody suffering. They might not talk about it. We're trained often, especially men, not to talk about pain and suffering, but everybody's got a story. Everybody has got something going on. And we often in our lives become blind to that. We're in our cars, we're driving down the highway, we don't see the homeless people, we don't really interact with people that much. But when you actually talk to people, you realize everybody's suffering, everybody's got a story. So our natural response, I think all of us, is to be kind, is to want to help. And I think about it. Our best strategy, I call it radical kindness, is given the fact that there's so much suffering in the world, is to first seek out opportunities to be kind. And that doesn't mean big things. It doesn't mean it means small things. Holding a door open for someone. It means letting somebody cut in front of you in traffic. All those little things that we can do every day to seek out opportunities to be kind. And then the second principle is to not take it personally when people don't reciprocate. If you hold the door open for someone and they don't say thank you, don't get upset. It's not about you, right? It's not about your ego. And the final point is, don't expect kindness back from the universe. It's not a tit for tat thing. It's about who we want to be in the world. And I choose to be as kind as I possibly can all the time. And that has been taught to me by firefighters for the last couple of decades, is watching firefighters be extraordinarily kind. And we talk about what firefighters are remembered for isn't the big red trucks and the flashing lights and burning or working on a house fire. It's how kind they are, and it's how they take the time to talk to people, how they take the time to shovel somebody's driveway. It's those kinds of things that people remember, and that's what I want to be remembered for too. Is that he was kind.
Well, and isn't that one of the mottos of the firefighters too?
Absolutely. Be brave, be kind, fight fires.
I think that simply says it all, right?
Yes.
It does. Well, Hersch, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your book, Firefighter Zen, and be part of your community?
Sure. I have a website, HerschWilson.com, HERSCH Wilson.com. And then I'm on Facebook at Hersch Wilson Author.
Well, Hersch, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Hersch. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, Firefighter Zen. Firefighter Zen's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. Also, Firefighter Zen's available on Kindle. If you'd like to connect with Hersch, you can at herschwilson.com for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.